Okay, we are back. If you joined us for the live webinar, I do sincerely apologize for the technical problems that we've had. But what I'll do here is just go through the presentation again, and so everyone's got the full picture of what I'll be talking about today, which is really two things. One is sort of the JSTOR perspective on release 5, and then the other half of that being how the user actions on JSTOR get translated into the release 5 metrics that then show up in reports, and then we'll go over some examples of those reports and what an interface looks like, and then for the folks that asked all those good questions in the webinar, Lorraine has passed them on to me. And if you have others based on the rest of the material, and you should see it all in this recording, please don't hesitate to reach out. My contact information is at the end, and you can always ask me or Lorraine if you have additional questions. So one of the things that's come up in supporting Release 5 for now almost 3 months is what libraries should expect from content and service providers. And the first is that January 2019 usage data needed to be provided in Release 5 format by February of 2019. And so as part of that process in releasing the new R5 usage data, is providers must undergo an audit within 6 months of declaring compliance. It's an independent audit. And one of the things that was really important for JSTOR in releasing Release 5 was to have already gone through that independent audit before we produced reports, so that we could ensure the highest quality data standards for libraries. And one of the things that we had experienced in the past is releasing a new set of reports and going through that audit process and realizing that we had done some things incorrectly, and then having to kind of go back and resend reports and communicate those changes. And that was just a frustrating experience for libraries and for us. And so this time we wanted to make sure that we had already passed the independent audit, and Project Counter and ABC were really helpful in helping us reach that goal. ABC was our auditing company, and making sure that when we sent out that first batch of data in January, that it was compliant. And so you'll see other providers. One of the things we'll talk about is kind of the timeline as people adopt R5 and come out with those reports. But you'll see kind of that process of content providers declaring compliance, releasing reports, and then getting audited. And that's not necessarily a bad process. It's just, the most important thing is just to make sure that we're all providing quality data from the beginning. So a little bit about the transition overview. There's been a lot of questions about this that we've had from libraries. So I mentioned that R5 reports must be provided for January 2019 usage, starting in February. There is a mandatory overlap between R4 and R5, where providers must offer new R4 data through March 2019. And so there's that 3 months overlap where you're getting both R4 and R5 reports from providers. And then in addition to that, content providers must provide 2+ current year of counter data at all times, which means that there are a couple different options for doing this. One is to provide Counter 4 reports going back a couple of years, which is what we're doing, or if you're able to back process, if you have the source data to be able to generate Counter 5 reports, that's another option as well. And you'll see what we've seen is publishers, and content providers take a different approach to how they're able to meet that requirement based on, you know, the capabilities or availability of data on their platforms. I want to highlight a few key changes, and I also want to highlight that most of the information in this presentation, if not all of it, is actually based on us having supported Release 5 and before that Release 4 for a number of years. A lot of this is based on, you know, common questions or you know, as we've done a couple of JSTOR participant webinars, you know, the things that people are asking about there or either surprised or, you know, want more information is really how I tried to structure this presentation. So the first is that there are no partial months in Release 5. Unlike Release 4, where you could include a partial month of data in your request, if you were to do that in Release 5, let's say via Sushi, we would, if you were to right now request May and April, we would return April data and tell you that May is not ready yet. And that is a requirement of Release 5 and a pretty significant change from how Release 4 was done. The second is that zero usage rows cannot be included in Release 5 reports. It's not that there's an option to include or exclude them. They are excluded across the board. And then want to note that there's, and this may have been discussed, excuse me, in some of the Q&A that I missed, but I know that there's work going on with the KBARD Automation Working Group Initiative right now to help pair entitlement and usage data to get at you know, those scenarios where you need to understand where low usage is happening or zero usage, because that information, at least the zero usage, is not included in Release 5 reports anymore. There are also fewer standard reports, so but there's actually a lot more flexibility in libraries' capabilities to get at specific questions depending on the scenario, the reporting scenario that they have. This is done with the custom or master reports. And we see a lot of use of those. And that's something that I'll highlight a little bit later as we look at where the demand has been for the different types of reports on JSTOR. And another, I think, change and improvement is the, you know, removal of the inconsistencies between tabular and JSON. It was certainly easier for us to implement because of the new Sushi JSON format. Not just in the format really, but in the protocol itself. You know, we saw a lot of confusion and frustration at times in trying to get the SOAP protocol working in Release 4, and I think in Release 5 we'll flow. We've already seen that, you know, in working on integration with libraries and other statistics services, that it's been a lot smoother in working through that integration and making corrections as needed. And so that's a change and as and then also just simpler, more reliable metrics across the different platforms. As Lorraine went over in her introduction today, the really format agnostic approach to usage metrics now. So what would, you know, as an example, what would be in Release 4, PDFs and HTML full text views, those are now rolled into a single metric, item requests. And so there's, I think there, you know, with the reduction, you know, that here is almost by 50% from R4 to R5, libraries should just have a much easier time in comparing data across platforms. Whereas in R4, there may, you know, there was more questions about, well, how are you doing this one? And I need different reports to be able to compare different things because of the way that usage is happening. And so I think that'll be an improvement for libraries as well. Some of the key challenges that we've seen touched on the timeline, the general timeline by how the players or pieces of the statistics gathering, reporting workflows, whether that be content providers, aggregation services, or libraries, is that delays, especially between the providers, the stats providers and the aggregators, can be painful. And we've had questions and concerns from our participants about timelines there. One of the key ones that we heard about was Alma was still working on a roadmap for their R5 implementation. I'm very happy to say that we're working with them now to kind of move that up and improve the speed at which we can make that integration happen, so that there's not a gap, a temporary gap in the statistics that they're collecting in that important service, at least from JSTOR. And kind of related to that is the different strategies that publishers and vendors are taking in terms of options for supporting historical data and capabilities and continuing to provide Counter 4 reports. And so we're providing on JSTOR Counter 4 as long as we can. It's through April 2019. It's a month after the mandatory transition line, but then we have to switch over to just providing Counter 5 data. And some of the challenges that introduces and dependencies that brings up, we're working hard to make sure that we're smoothing those out as best we can to give libraries the experience they deserve. The last piece, which is not a challenge necessarily specific to release 5, but just in general of rolling out a new release like this, is helping educate and train the community and us as JSTOR as an organization, and what the reports and metrics mean, with a new set of reports that come out and all the customization and different names of standard views, how they map to the different reporting use cases, and then additionally what the metrics mean in terms of the actions on the platform. And we'll talk about kind of the importance and being very transparent about that, and what I think is a responsibility of content providers like JSTOR. A couple areas to improve that I wanted to touch on that Lorraine and I have both talked about quite a bit. That I think the community, as she mentioned, it's a community and membership type organization. So we all have responsibility to help make it better. Is the first being that the problem with consortial reports in Release 4, I think, is just they were very difficult to build and deliver because of their size. And so in Release 5, there are no consortial reports, and that's obviously a concern and presents challenges for some groups. There is an improved workflow to request and receive all the members of your group or consortium on a platform, and then request individual reports for each one of those through Sushi. And some of the feedback that we've heard is that the technical bar is just too high there. Even with the improved Sushi workflow, that takes resources and time to be able to implement something like this. And so Lorraine may want to comment a little bit more on this later. But I know that there's a solution being worked on right now that Project Counter is helping sponsor to get more of a single click or streamlined workflow in place to be able to request that group view of usage in Release 5. JSTOR is also getting ready to release a consortial report with R5 metrics that will be similar to what was a summary view of usage and searches and all that good stuff for a number of institutions in a single report. We'll release that in May. And really we're doing that because we just see it as an expectation and core reporting need of our consortia and group accounts that we need to meet. And so that'll be out soon, and we'll continue to look for other ways to help with the general problem of needing to get that broader view of usage across accounts, that the single reporting workflow can make it a little bit challenging to get at times. And then the other, I think, area that we all need to be thinking about ways that we can kind of get more out of the Release 5 spec is with reporting on open access and free content. Right now, the OA Gold is the only access type designation that allows you to say this content was accessed through an open access license. The problem there is that the bar that content has to pass or get over in order to qualify for that is it must be deemed immediately and permanently available through an open access license upon publication. And that type of information needs to be confirmed by the publisher. So for an aggregator like JSTOR, that can be a difficult thing to communicate and get confirmation on. And then the bigger problem is kind of, I see it, is that a lot of our open access content, especially with books, doesn't meet that, won't ever meet that qualification, even though the content might be permanently open access. You think of titles like Knowledge Unlatched and what have you, and those just won't ever line up with that definition. And so Lorraine, I know, elaborated this a bit in the Q&A at the live webinar, but there is considering expanding open access metric or adding another metric for more of a delayed OA model. And really for us, you know, we JSTOR feel that it's important that we communicate the open access use that's happening on our platform. It's significant, and you know, we want to be able to do that in a shared framework, such as, you know, Counter, Release 5, being able to include that type of information in reports and talk about it in that same frame of you know, user action to metric type mapping is important. I think this is really important. So need to continue to kind of push that forward there as a community. So that was sort of our general, you know, reactions to Release 5. What I'll do now is go through some of the documentation that we've created in response to a lot of the really common questions. We'll also give some insight into the report requests, the demand that we're seeing for reports here, which I think is pretty interesting. We'll look at an example of report UI in Release 5, one on JSTOR, obviously. It's one I have access to, so that's what we'll use here. And then look at some sample reports, just to kind of give you a feel for how these metrics show up, what different reports look like, and then go through some of the top frequently asked questions for libraries. And again, if you have more detailed questions, obviously, if you got them out in the live webinar, that's great. But if you have questions about any of this, you know, my email and our support links are at the end of the presentation, so please do reach out. This is an example of how we've addressed one of the more common report questions or support questions that we've got, rather. In Project Counter also, we actually got this from the Project Counter website. They have a nice page that kind of outlines what the C4 to C5 report mapping was. We were getting a lot of questions about this, and so we have a sort of a copy of this information on our support site as well. I can say that I saw a very helpful presentation from Oliver Pesch the other week or two that was kind of going through, okay, use case. This is for this use case, this report, these metrics, and I think that kind of gets through not just what report, but what the metrics can answer, and also the friendly guides that I know were discussed earlier today and are linked to both on our website and available on Project Counter's website where they're created. Do a really nice job of saying, you know, this is, you know, there's a scenario where someone does these, user actions, and this is the numbers that get created in the report, in this hypothetical report. I think the thing that we've learned is that we need to take that type of specificity, articulation of what the user action to metric means, and document that so that libraries can know exactly how those metrics are getting created. And that takes me to this side, which is that documentation. And since we've added this documentation to our support page, the views and helpfulness rating, if you will, if that page has gone way up. That was one of the most popular questions in release 4 was, I see these metrics in this report, what things are happening on JSTOR that translate to these different metrics. And in R5, now that we're going from acknowledging a format, whether that be PDF or HTML, into truly a format agnostic model, it's going to be even more important for providers to document what's happening on their platform and how those user actions are getting transformed into R5 metrics. And so we've got this great documentation here. One of the things that, and this is available on the support site, and that link will be provided later. One of the things I want to note, you heard Lorraine talk a little bit about the platform and database definitions in terms of what they mean in Counter. JSTOR, as it is now, is considered both a database and a platform, which is why you see things like basic search, advanced search, our image search count as both a platform search metric and a database search metric. The idea of the platform being it's the underlying set of services that support all of the databases. Right now, in the way that JSTOR surfaces its collections and content types, it's all done through a single sort of database, and that being the main JSTOR site. And so they're really one and the same at the moment. However, as you may have heard, our JSTOR Digital Library is moving on to the JSTOR Service Platform, using the set of shared underlying services served on the our JSTOR Digital Library site, and so that would be counted as a separate database. And we're working on those R5 reports now. They should be available by September 2019, and you can imagine that at the platform level, any search done whether on ArtStore or JSTOR for your institution, registered as platform search, and the search's regular metric, which is the database search, is relevant to what database, whether that be ArtStore or JSTOR, in terms of the websites as they are now. That's how that's recorded. So just an example of kind of how the database and platform relationship works in Counter terms. Okay, I want to go through some examples of what those user actions look like. So rather than a live demo, I wanted to just show kind of the most common user actions that are being recorded towards release 5 metrics. So that we'll start with item requests, obviously very important, full text usage. The 4 that I have here, you can kind of see there's 4 different scenarios. On the bottom left, we've got the Mona Lisa, which is our image modal. Looking at the image modal itself, by itself, is not an item request, and I'll talk about why that is in just a minute. But what does count as a request is downloading that image, right? And so, again, format agnostic, it's not text, it's not a video, it's an image, but it all still counts as an item request. And the same thing applies for, if you look at the frame above, you'll see the journal article for the most Mona Lisa, Burlington Magazine, and in search results, there's a download PDF button. If the user downloads a PDF, that also gets counted as an item request. The 2 on the right side are different views of, different content types for text. One is journals, one is books. And you can see here that the user has accessed a full text version of the page, and so that gets counted as an item request. If they were to then also download the PDF, that would count as an additional item request. But that's where the value comes in having those unique item totals or unique title for books, is that you can get sort of a view of all of the usage that's happening across the board via the total item requests. Then they can also get that important view of how many different things were accessed for scenarios where you have very setups like this, where it's important to serve full text in different formats for different purposes, and we want to support both of those, and they both need to count, but that might not be the most important thing for the question you're answering. So it really just depends. But what I like about Release 5 is it gives that kind of flexibility in terms of views into usage. And then the one below here is the I'm sorry, the top one is the book chapter and the bottom one is the journal article, which are very similar on JSTOR in terms of how they're presented. And as just a quick reminder that item requests also do count as item investigations, as the graphic that Lorraine showed in her intro pretty well demonstrates. We have a few scenarios on JSTOR where you've got actions that only record an item investigation and do not record an item request. So the Mona Lisa modal that I showed earlier is an example of that. The scenario here is that from search results, if your participating institution on JSTOR also has access to the 8AL collection, it'll come up in search results. And if you click on that modal, we display, this is sort of an enlarged version of that, but what we consider to be more of a thumbnail of the image with some metadata alongside of it. This isn't downloading the image. You're not going to explore the full image with an in-browser viewer. And so this counts as an item investigation, but not an item request. It's more of a preview of the content, which is interesting because you think of abstracts as or article previews in the context of text items, but for images, there's kind of the version of that is showing a much smaller version of the image. There's less interactivity, and so this counts as an item request, or I'm sorry, an item investigation. On the right side, you've got the two scenarios where a user at an institution is coming to an article or book chapter, just as two examples of text content, but does not have a license for this. And so because in this scenario we present an abstract or preview of the document, in terms of the book, we've got the table of contents that gives summaries of each chapter. Even though you can't download those chapters or view the full text of them, those also count as item investigations. They're actions in relation to the content item, kind of the spirit of what the investigation's about. You've got a user that's looking at is interested, is looking at something, but isn't able to access the full text. And one of the really kind of neat things about Release 5 that I'm curious to see how libraries adopt this into their reporting mechanisms is, on JSTOR right now, we have a number of different search functions. We have different tools depending on the workflow or the need. We have our main search that's in the top left that we've had for quite a while. We have advanced search, also been around for a while. But then we've added new tools such as topic pages, text analyzer, data for research, which is a text and data mining service. And all of these search functions count as search, both on the platform and database level. So all of those are being captured, which is really important, I think, to have, regardless of the use case that you're talking about, to include those in Release 5 metrics. The one that is new, at least for JSTOR, is the search facets. And so the kind of spirit of what it means to count as a new search is when a user takes an action that thus necessitates a new search to be executed on the back end and a new set of results to be displayed that needs to be counted as a new search. That is not how our facets have always worked, but we've done some improvements there, and I would imagine this is similar to how other platforms are doing this as well, is where you have facets being used to refine or kind of change the result set. And because those require a new search in the back end and a new set of results, those are now being counted as separate searches per the new code of practice. And so we've had some questions from libraries who have seen their search numbers go up a bit. That is in part due to this. It's also in part due to, we've been adding more tools for people to search with, but I think facets have definitely played a role in there. And those numbers going up a bit. And then finally, the last kind of category, turnaway category, JSTOR only supports or requires the no license metric. For turnaways, we do not have content on the platform that would require the limit exceeded metric type, which is when you've run out of simultaneous uses. So we don't have that on JSTOR, but we do have the scenario where you have an authenticated user who is looking at a content item that does not that the institution does not have access to. And so in those scenarios, we record a no license event. And these might look familiar. We just saw these on the item investigations page. And what's happening here is there's sort of two metrics occurring at once. One is the no license event to say someone tried to look at something that your institution doesn't have access to, and then an item investigation, which says, the user was interested in this piece of content, but no item request, obviously, because the full text is not being accessed here. So now I want to take a quick dive into a few just example reports to show you what they look like. These are all run with a demo institution. They're not real usage numbers, but I think looking at them is really beneficial just to kind of show how those types of that information is presented in a report. I would say that, if you're a JSTOR participant or have access to an R5 reporting system elsewhere, it's a really good idea just to get in there and start looking at how the data is presented, especially across providers. And there should be a great deal of consistency. I can show you a couple things where we've made slight improvements to the output that I think will make it easier for libraries to look at. But just always a great idea to get in there and dig around. And I know that many or all of you will do this or are already doing this. So the PR master report, this is the customizable version of the platform report. And you can see here is what I've chosen to look at is a number of different metrics that are in the metrics type row. And the report header in general, I think, is just much easier to read. It's just much more, it's consistent across all of the tabular formats, of course, but I think even looking at the JSON, it's pretty easy to see how the reports are the same. So that's a good thing. And you can see here is I've chosen to filter by data type and include that grouping in the report. And so what that means is book and journal, which are the two data types I've chosen, are the only content types that this usage report is reporting against. And so for all the metric types that I've included, it breaks that usage out by book and journal. The exception here is searches. Searches do not support a data type. There's no data type tied to searches, so you're just going to get a total there. And then the other exception that Lorraine covered in her introduction is that the unique title calculations are only applied to the book metric. And so what you see here is you've got those couple of metrics at the end: unique title investigations, unique title requests, which are only applied to the book data type and not to the journal data type. There's a reporting period total that's required. You do have an option to exclude all the individual months if that's not something you're interested in looking at. I only requested April here and left it in just to give you an example of kind of how that works. Similar in terms of layout. Wanted to show you this because there just are some different metric types that are available in the DR report suite. You can see here in the metric types, one of the metrics I've included is searches automated, searches federated, and automated is not a supported data type on JSTOR, but it still needs to be an option in the UI. And searches federated is a required a metric type for is applicable for JSTOR, but this particular account did not have any federated searches in the reporting period, and so wanted to show you that this it would not appear in the row because there's zero usage or zero federated searches for this month, while the other metric types have use or positive values and therefore are included in the report. This is an example of a title report. This is the TRJ3, which is the title report that includes open access use. Because of the very low amount of OA Gold content that has been qualified on JSTOR, this report is actually very similar to the TRJ1 in terms of usage numbers, and almost identical in terms of the layout of the report. This is a standard view, and you can see here that the standard view comes with a predefined set of metric types. One of the things I had mentioned earlier in terms of report outputs, one of the enhancements that we felt was important was to add some sorting and filtering. Sorting to support filtering. And so we looked at, talked to some libraries and said, what are the ways that you're looking at this report? Being able to sort by title and then metric type was sort of an important way to have that information organized. I don't know if other providers are doing this, but I think, just from a readability standpoint and the fact that we see so many reports, I would say between the three formats in release 4, almost 60% of the requests, maybe even more, were for the Excel format, and so people are looking at this, with their eyes a lot of the time. So filter or sorting is important aspect of that. The last one that we'll look at today is the IRM1, which is a really interesting report because it reports on usage at the item level. So you're looking at individual assets here and the use of them. And this is how we report on the use of image content on JSTOR. And so what you'll see is the JSTOR proprietary ID. The URI is actually to the canonical version of the asset on ArtStore, but because the usage is happening on JSTOR.org, it gets included in the JSTOR report. And so, really interesting to see all the different, how libraries will look at this to kind of help evaluate what's going on with these sort of unstructured data types and the use of them in a report like this. Okay, so we'll quickly go over what the UI looks like. One of the things that we added here, because we got so many questions about it, was helping people understand what their sushi information looks like, or their customer requester ID, which are mandatory to make sushi requests. And so we put that information in the UI, and hopefully other providers are making that easy as well. Also including a short description of the selected report, just to give a reminder of what each one of the reports does. You have to be able, as a provider, you are required by the code of practice to be able to deliver sort of a monthly subscription for the new data, so that you don't have to come pull it every month. And so that's something that we've done here. and we did this in release 4, and assume everyone's doing this, but just wanted to point out that's something that should be available to you in release 5. Is also required that you default to the most recent available full month. So that would be April as of today. And the idea here is that it just needs to be easy process for people who want to come in and get that last month of data. And so that's a requirement that we have to follow. And then you also have to offer JSON and TSV formats. At least those two should be available from all providers. We've chosen to offer XLSX because that was such a highly preferred format in R4. So that you'll see that and likely see that as an option from others as well. To reiterate what requesting a standard view is all about, this is our report request confirmation page. And you can see here that when you select a standard view, the UI needs to automatically set those defined preset metrics, attributes, and filters. That's all done for you. You don't have to go in and select those. And so on this confirmation page here, you can see that the PRP1 comes with a set predefined selection of data type, access method, metric type, etc. And in the master reports, it's actually quite different. You can mix and match pretty much any way you would like. Whether this is the title master report, and you can see we've got data type, section type, which is sort of like the next level down from the title. You can also filter from your publication in many different ways, and any of the other types of attributes or metric types that you want. You can exclude the header, and exclude monthly details if you're just looking for that total. So really a good way to get at exactly the type of metrics or data that you need to answer the question that you have. So this is what we've seen so far as of May 10th. So almost 3 months of data, and the TRJ1 corresponding to the J1, the JR1 and Counter 4s, obviously that's a really popular report, seeing all kinds of those, and then the database report sort of following that in distant second. But what I like about this, at least what we've got so far, is we see a lot of people taking advantage of the master reports, which I think is really interesting and good. It's worth our time to implement those capabilities, because they're really desired by libraries in terms of just getting down to the specific data points that you need to answer your question. And so I want to say just a quick point about our top frequently asked questions. I hope all the information that you've gotten so far about what the UI and reports look like, and the documentation sharing that we've done to really bring better transparency and visibility into Release 5 has been helpful. We've gotten a handful of questions that have kind of come up over and over. The lack of consortia reporting in Release 5 has been one that we've heard concern about. And in general, our response for why are there no consortia reports, my understanding is just, and experience was just, again, that they were very difficult to implement and distribute. Actually was not very technically feasible in some situations. And so I think as providers offer different solutions to the consortia reporting, and in addition to the work Project Counter is commissioning now, we should see some better solutions there than what we had before, which were sometimes very unmanageable files. I had a lot of questions as well about the transition, and I know that this has been frustrating for some libraries because they're having to deal with the transition from obviously many different content providers. And so in addition to providing good support and clarity about any actions you need to take, I think documenting that so that it's just very easy for libraries to know if there's anything they need to do to get ready for the transition from a certain platform on a certain platform, that's very clear. And one of the in kind of relation to that is, even if the library doesn't need to do anything too specific to get ready for release 5, they need their services that they're subscribing to, their statistics aggregation services, reporting services, to be ready, right? They are relying on the providers and the services to have that integration done in time, and some are saying we're worried that that's not going to happen. And the approach we've taken here, when we've worked with, where we're working with folks like Alma and others at actually Risen ProQuest right now to help move those integrations along, is let them know this is an expectation of yours, that this integration happens, and we, JSTOR, are certainly available to help test and put those pieces together. And so we've already had some folks, both libraries and commercial services, contact us to help with testing, and we're certainly here to continue doing that. Other questions about search numbers, which again will vary from platform to platform. On JSTOR, there's a pretty straightforward answer for that. And it's not that it's always been super drastic. It's more just, people are looking, and that's what that evaluation kind of overlap period is for, right? Or C4 and C5 are there so people can look at reports and get a feel for what the numbers look like. And by all, accounts, they should really be very, very similar. And then just general transition questions about, what report's best for my specific need, what the metrics mean, and that's where that documentation comes into play. We also had questions about the approaches taken, at least specifically on JSTOR, about providing Counter 5 data. So we've had some questions about why can't we provide Counter 5 data going back a couple of years so there's more of a consistent view. And realize that publishers and kind of providers are probably handling this differently depending on the scenario that they're in. For us, it's most important to be able to provide trusted, reliable metrics for whatever years we're providing them. And we just didn't have all of the Counter 5 metrics recorded on our platform going back that far. And so providing Counter 4 for those years was really our best option. So here are, Lorraine will send around a link to this webinar recording, which is wonderful. There will be a couple additional links that I'll include in there so that, there'll be more specific to JSTOR before the JSTOR participants on this call. You'll have that information. But for anyone, if you have questions about our experience implementing or supporting libraries, or concerns about what's going to happen going forward, please don't hesitate to send me an email or send our support team an email. Visit our support site as well. We'll be more than happy to help.